So for all of those that are still here, thank you for making it until our last panel. We left, I think, probably the most important part last, which is we talked about sustainability, we talked about inclusivity. We left for the last panel the question: what are we actually sustaining? What are we actually giving access to, and so on? And the simple answer to that is a space of artistic freedom, of freedom of speech. And I think especially in times in which we've seen increasingly censorship, war, conflicts, genocides, I think it was important to conclude with a panel that would discuss how do we defend our rights of artistic freedom, of freedom of speech in the context of biennials. To answer this question, or to talk about this topic, we have with us Hoor Qasimi, who is president and director of Sharjah Art Foundation, director of Sharjah Biennial since 2003, and curated, of course, the last Sharjah Biennial in 2023. She also serves, and that's not irrelevant, as president of the International Biennial Association and of the African Institute in Sharjah. A few other things, and of course will curate the next edition of both Aichi Triennial and Sydney Triennial in 2025. Biennial, sorry, I turned you into Triennial. Also with us are Julia Morandeira Arrizabalaga, kind of, tried my best, who is a curator, researcher, and educator. She's director of the Paris branch of Cadist and a lecturer in Leiden University, where she coordinates the minor social and ecological justice activism in the visual arts. With us also is, I'll skip to this side, Thiago da Paula Souza, who just reached us from Sao Paulo. So welcome to Lyon. He's a curator and educator born in Sao Paulo. He's currently part of the curatorial team of the next Sao Paulo Biennial in 2025 as well. And he co-curated, or he was part of the curatorial team of the 10th Berlin Biennial, You Don't Need Another Hero. Lastly with us is also Mouna Mekouar, again, more or less, who is a curator, an art critic, and she co-curated or curated the Shanghai Biennial in 2016, co-curated. Oh, you were part of it? I had the wrong thing. Together with Rax Media Collective, which was the curators. So, welcome all. I tried my best. So, yeah, subject is quite serious, and I think quite also timely to talk about that now. Maybe I can start with a question, and then you can take it from there, and we try to keep it as dialogic as possible. The question is very simple. It's not simple. It's very simple. Which is how can Biennial continue to provide a space for critical thoughts and free artistic expression in the face of rising censorship and other kinds of limits to freedom of speech and artistic freedom these days? It's a broad question, but I think it should start the conversation. You can definitely start.
Thank you, Christian. Thank you all for being here throughout these last few days, and hopefully we'll see more of you while we visit the Lyon Biennale. It's important for us to realize what a lot of our colleagues are going through. As Christian mentioned, Majd couldn't be here with us because he's in Beirut. Christine Tome, who's also on our board, could not be with us because she's in Beirut. Khalil Rabah in Ramallah. It's important to acknowledge what is happening around us. We are not working in an echo chamber when we work in Biennales. It's an internationally connected art world that really calls for solidarities. And what we saw recently was a lot of artists being cancelled, their exhibitions being cancelled just for their solidarities, just for being Arab, just for signing a solidarity statement. And it's really important to realize that we talk about democracies and the art world being, spaces of freedom, and in our part of the world we get criticized for censorship because we don't want to show overtly sexual works in a place where children visit. But there are other forms of censorship, political censorship, where they try to just align with the desires of who gives money and who supports. So I think it's important to talk about these things because many, many artists have really struggled recently to be included and also are very much have also had lots of their opportunities taken away from them just because of who you are. And I'm quoting, because of who they are, I'm quoting somebody, an institution who said that to an Arab artist. It's because of who you are that I have to cancel a major solo show with you that's opening in a couple of months. So I think it's important to take that into consideration when we talk about spaces of solidarity.
Hey, hello. I'm Thiago. First, thank you for the invitation, and it's lovely to see you all here on a Sunday afternoon. That shows how committed we all are here, and how we truly believe in things that sometimes, or in a system that sometimes make us give up. So it's lovely to see you all here. I guess trying to follow up what Hoor just said. For a while, I think for too long, maybe we believed in some sort of an idea, a universal, a fake idea about universality, or we truly believed that the world was the mirror of ourselves. Yeah, and I think in times like now, the times that we're living now, we understand that the difference becomes more and more apparent. And it feels that biennials can be spaces where artists can help us to deal with those differences and those different infrastructures. Democracy is still the best system that we have, but how can it operate in different corners of the globe, and how it can be transformed from local and different perspectives. Because I think we now know that the idea of a global art world cannot, it doesn't really make sense because of our differences. And those differences, they shouldn't be ignored, they should be fostered, but understanding that the encounter with difference should just be something that generates a possibility of encounter, if it makes sense, instead of us insisting on an idea of neutrality or universality, but fostering the difference, and this difference will produce something that we can't even anticipate yet. But this is still also some sort of humanity that we've fostered somehow. Yeah, I guess just to warm up.
Thank you very much, and thank you for inviting me. I feel a bit shy to be with such great curators and directors of biennials, and it's a privilege, I would say, for me to talk here, because I've never curated a biennial by myself, but I was just part of one of them in Shanghai. And from my point of view, and to answer to Thiago and to Hoor, I would say that we should not forget what does it mean to be a curator. A curator should take care of it. It's coming from Latin, the word curating, and it says only to take care. So we should not forget to take care of the artist, we should not forget to take care of the audience, of the spaces, and we should also not forget, as a curator, to have empathy, to be curious, and it's not negative to be curious, but it's really something really important, and to keep everything, even contradictions, should be part of our way of curating and of a way of looking to art and artists. And I think also that curators, artists, the art scene, it's a community which is beyond the borders, beyond countries, beyond continents. It's a very strong community, and we should not forget that, because I think that could also help us to hope and to keep faith on what we are doing every day, and to continue even if we struggle sometimes. So yeah, I think this is the way I see things, and I know that it's becoming more and more hard, some things, sometimes to do a show, to do an exhibition, for many, many reasons. But nevertheless, I think we should never forget to respect the artist. I think an exhibition or a biennial is maybe not only a place for art or a place with art, but it's a place where art could work on us and could change us. And we should not forget that, because I think that could also help us to move a bit forward in the future. Pardon.
Merci. Again, thank you everyone around this table, and especially ABA for the invitation, because I think as broad, as large encompassing as the question of the table is, I think gatherings such as this, like sharing and thinking and convening our heads around it, are extremely important. Not only as we alarmingly see the censorship going, I mean, to actually very, very dangerous and extremely, dangerous extremes and ends, but specifically also that is going hand in hand with an incredible and dramatic reduction of the space of speech itself. I really like actually in the previous panel how there was this idea of how can we embrace complexity. I mean, I'm rephrasing it, no? And I think for me, actually, cultural work, artistic work has always been to grapple, to engage with, to open up other forms of being together, otherwise that teaches us, as Thiago, you were saying, you know, how can we actually be together in difference, but not in a reductive way, but actually in a form that celebrates and cherishes all those differences. And this art, and especially biennials, are able to do, not only beyond the maybe actually we want to start thinking of more concrete gestures, no? Not only through the exhibition, but also thinking beyond the exhibitionary form. If we think of what forms of gatherings do we invite, what forms of solidarities, as Hoor was invoking. And since I have Natasha Petrushin in front of me, solidarity is not a metaphor. It has to be a very concrete practice of gestures, of choreographies, of contracts, of refusals, and of alliances, or in forms of creating other forms of aligning. Sometimes maybe it has to do with actually refusing a form of funding that you were receiving, and maybe your biennial or maybe your event is going to be a bit smaller. I actually, for example, I really remember We Don't Need Another Hero because a change of scale from the previous biennial and the ability to actually engage more in depth and at large actually with the proposals that are being made. So can we actually move to think, you know, this pretended universalism, very Western-centric universalism, and pretended neutrality of the institution of the biennial that is now debunked, has to open up with other forms of working, other forms of infrastructure or so setting up, no? That create other conditions of work for the long run.
Can I just add also that's another reason for the IBA to exist, really, in terms of solidarities through biennials. For the longest time, people always assumed that biennials have to compete. There's always a competition between biennials, and what we're trying to do is to be collegial and to, you know, work together also with our differences. You know, I think we need to embrace our differences, but also come together and learn from each other. So spaces like this are really important.
There's two thoughts that I heard in your speeches, but also that came to mind thinking of other references and so on. And one is, I think in times like this, we all need to think of fragility, both in terms of institutional fragility, and that is concerning funding that can be withdrawn. It can be concerning shows that can be cancelled and so on. And the other, of course, fragility is of the artists that we're all working with. So I think this is something that maybe we can elaborate more, but I do think that that is the time in which we are. This idea of this double idea of fragility is something quite important to reflect on. The other was, I'm sorry for getting a little bit more theoretical, but I remember a writing of Chantal Mouffe of around 2010, 2008, and so on, of spaces of like agonistic spaces, in which it's not about coming together and kind of finding a balance point and coming together and understanding, yeah, but we can all be friends. No, maybe we cannot. Maybe we have differences, but it is still important to be in the same space and to try to understand how to turn that those differences into a dialogue, into a discussion, into an active dialogue. So maybe these are all concepts that we can kind of put together and bring to a discussion that I think we need in times in which some of the differences today cannot be overcome. We were talking yesterday about art being something political or not. I don't think it can be something not political, especially in times like this. I think we have to stand our ground in whichever ground we are, whether it's one side or the other. But neutrality is not an option, unfortunately. So
I just want to also take note that, you know, artists have been refusing funding for the longest time. It's nothing new. You know, like throughout history, artists have always challenged you know, support for institutions, and I think it's important to realize that this is happening across many countries and many institutions, museums, and it touches on different types of funding bodies. You know, if it's related to weapons or prisons or etc. So I think it's important to realize that this is all in the same. It all comes in the same box. It's all the part of the same issue. And I think when we try to isolate situations is when we get into trouble, because the idea is that when you talk about ethics or human rights, you talk about all human rights. When you talk about solidarity, you talk about like solidarity across the board, inclusion across the board. So I think it's important to open up these boxes and realize that you're not working through one specific point in time, or one specific disaster or genocide in time, but this is something throughout history. So.
No, perhaps, just going back to the idea of like difference and combining with what you just said, when I was thinking about difference, it was also in my mind some concepts or some notions that sometimes we just take it for granted that they are universal. Like when you think about freedom, for example, or freedom of speech. And of course, they can be part of like human rights, and we should struggle to preserve them. But the notion of freedom or liberty in the United States is completely different from the notion of liberty, let's say, for different communities, indigenous communities in Brazil, and I'm sure in South Africa or in different corners of the globe. And so I think that a space to rehearse these possibilities of conversation, or how to bring these different notions or these different values in the same table and articulate bridges among them, this can be an experimental space that art can provide. Maybe, and that's when I mention about difference, it's more about that, and it's definitely not sitting with a fascist on the same table. On the other hand, it's really trying to build friendships through different values. You know, even if those values don't belong to your cosmology, you know, or your horizon, your perspectives of life. I guess this is more the difference that I was trying to address. And when you mention about fragility, in a certain sense, it also makes me think that for the majority of the world who were producing art, fragility has been like a constant in a certain sense. Like institutions are strong institutions. I mean, we should struggle for them, but they operating is small parts of this globe, and fragility has always been an element for artistic production. And of course, we should support more and more, but at the same time, I feel that, I mean, it even produced me an anxiety to try to imagine what exactly it's our road to get rid of this sort of like fragility.
I was actually thinking while listening to the question and also to the contributions, and that how do we couple actually forms of positionality with also sometimes more oblique or even clandestine strategies, no? I'm actually now, for example, actually working, cannot disclose unfortunately, but like with a Biennial who's trying to support the artists and the artistic actually collectives through other ways of actually composite funding, but specifically also not unveiling the names of those artists until it's been open because of fear of backlash. So, I mean, I'm working now at Cadiz, at least for this week. So being also a private institution, for me, it's actually, it's been able to make it accessible, no? Other forms of support and basically working out throughout, which is a type of work that goes, yeah, in a bit more of an oblique strategy. And then secondly, so today I'm director of Cadiz. Next week I'm going to actually be moving to another country and to another city and taking another position as director of research at Reina Sofia Museum in Madrid. And but and precisely, I mean, it's a whole new department that will need to set up. But there is a genealogy, and there is actually a very important heritage of the museum that its former director Manolo Borja Villel put into place, and which was, for example, working with networks. No, so for a long time, actually, different forms of association, political organizations, and other forms of institutionality that actually were developing a very dense fabric of support in the national scale, were actually being supported by the museum, but actually not in a frontal or a way, but trying to actually mobilize resources, funds, without always being very careful not to also co-opt or engulf those initiatives, but actually provide understanding its role as a national museum to actually also create those infrastructures of support, and yeah, to maybe also think the question of fragility, support, and positionality through other variable geometries of collaboration and work. Yeah.
I would like to, I've heard about talking about gathering, exchanging, solidarity, differences, universalism, and there is a very simple metaphor about what is a biennial or what is an international group exhibition. And the way I see a biennial or the way I see an international exhibition with a group of artists is like a carpet. We are weaving together different people, gathering them on one space or one territory. A carpet is an object, but it's also a gesture. It's also about gathering, it's also about exchanging, it's also traveling. It's here, but it's also elsewhere. And I think we should just keep on mind this very simple thing of how we should weave and unweave, do and undo, and learn and unlearn, and try to keep our eyes as much as open to try to understand how we could gather all together now, how we could be together like now, today. But even during a biennial or doing an exhibition in a very small space or in a very large space, doesn't matter. It's still, in my point of view, and this is the way I think exhibitions, really as a weaving and as a carpet. And it brings also different languages and different techniques, and it's also a way to think not only the present, but to bring also the past and the future part of it. Because weaving has been always a very old technology, but it's also part of our present, and it will be also there in the future. So I think it's also a way to bring in a very metaphorical way to talk about some issues that we have today, and that Hoor has raised. And carpet are really important nowadays, and we should not forget. I would not forget also the work of Tariq Kiswanson, who's doing a whole show and a whole exhibition about the carpet of his parents and grandparents. And I think it's a way of looking to our job and as curators or as working in biennials or working in museums, how we should provide new languages, but through also what happens before and what's happening today.
I want to go back to what Julia was saying about Manolo's Museo Expanso. How was it called? Anyways, the strategy of Manolo's way of was Museo Expanso, something like that. I don't remember. Anyways, Expandido, no, something like that. Because I think one thing that we can do, and like it's, I think something that as IBA we try to do is not just to talk theoretically about things, but also try to imagine strategies. And I think it was great to see, like, to imagine direct collaboration and direct solidarity and so on, but also to try to imagine how we can act in solidarity to each other, also in moments in which this solidarity is actually difficult to show, because there are cases in which there are international political barriers towards this. And so this is also a way of trying to expand not just to the panel, but to all of us here present. If we can try to find ways of expliciting or at least reflecting on how to turn the topics and the ideas that were expressed now into concrete actions, because I think that's something that we as biennial community really should start to think. Like, yes, we're not going to be able to change the world, absolutely, but we can set some examples. We can try to find ways of acting and activating the network that we represent. So that's a stimulus to you, but to everyone in the room.
Yeah, I think, like you said, it's spaces to start conversation, right? I think the issue for the longest period of time, the history of colonialism, is to divide and conquer. So the more that we can come together and share our ideas and also our traumas, the more powerful I think our work will be in the future. I mean, it's simple to say, you know, together we're stronger, but I think it's important to share a lot of the histories and the trauma and to be honest about it. We don't have to agree about anything, but it's important to speak about it and to share. And I think spaces like this of gathering, and Julia and I worked on a project together as well in Paris, a convening of civic poets. So it's through poets and artists and writers that we're able to imagine these kind of spaces. And we are nothing without the artists we're working with. So I think it's important to realize that.
Actually, like, this is actually a very good example because, I mean, it's very concrete. So this exhibition that Hoor and I imagined and put together was open on the 5th of October. So 5th of October 2023. So basically a couple of days before the whole actually ongoing genocide that we're seeing and conflict in front of our eyes actually started. And it's an exhibition that was open from October till February. So 4 months in which actually it's I think the title is very eloquent. It was a convening of civic poets. So the exhibition was thought as a way of convening, as a space of encounter and of engagement, not through actually the complexities and urgencies that we were working with, but specifically with the central aspect of actually taking a stance and voicing, not only as actually a political position, but as an organic continuation of our practice as cultural workers, as artists, and so forth. So through a lot of actually discussing and self-reflection, the whole public program of the exhibition actually became a forum and an arena of thinking through what forms of gestures, what forms of strategies can we actually raise against silencing, what forms of responses can we do against actually the ongoing consumption of violence, how can we actually find other ways to be together and create forms of solidarity that also hold us together, no? Through poetic stances, but also, yeah, an artistic spectrum. So, I mean, I think thinking what is, how our work is never neutral. I mean, and this goes without saying that, yeah, I mean, all art, all culture is produced from very situated and very rooted conditions that make it political. It doesn't have to be always overtly political. It's a very large spectrum that we actually work with and arrange. No, that's actually what a curator in a good way, and as you say, Mouna, like basically arranging, composing through listening, through holding together. So it was at least for me, it was a very important actually exercise of how to actually stand in the face of utmost violence as a cultural programmer, how to open up our spaces, what can we do, and how to respond to that. And for example, like also in my teaching practice, how to do that, how to also equip the students and the class and the syllabus with bibliography, with resources, with tools, that are always at hand, but how to actually also think or events or programs or institutions as this bank of resources. Bank is it's not a very nice word, but collection, archive, yeah.
Also just to mention that there were important figures in this exhibition that were referenced, right? The Black Panthers, Angela Davis, Jean Genet, we had Radio Al-Hara, Bushra Khalili's work, of course, was there. So it was really important that these figures, or like civic poets, are people throughout history who have done so much, and it's important that their works and what they've done historically is still relevant today. And I think that's something to also mention.
Try to bring things always back to Biennials and to the arena in which we are. And so my question is, in what way can a Biennial, alternatively to another kind of institution, provides this kind of platform? Yes, we're networked, that's one thing, but we also create a specific kind of space. We are subjective to more scrutiny in one sense because it's a big event that happens and we have press coverage and so on, but most of the biennials are also quite fragile for other reasons. So if you have thoughts both as curators and directors and so on, it would be great to try to start.
I guess what Natasha said before, late in the morning, was quite inspiring in the sense that you really need to understand where you are and where you are located and how that context operates. I think this is fundamental. One thing that I can talk maybe more about like São Paulo because it's a place where I feel like, if some place we can call home, and so São Paulo is like home. When I was doing in Berlin, the Biennale in Berlin, it was like amazing and a massive challenge, but it was not home. So my perspectives were different. I was like a foreigner. But now that I'm back home and I'm quite close to the institution in a very emotional level also. Like, I mean, the Biennale there, it's not like a show, it's not an institution only for art experts, but it's often the first experience or the first contact with contemporary art for a lot of like students from public schools, people who are not really thinking daily about our artistic practice every day like we are. And so probably the Biennale was one of the first shows that I saw when I was like a kid, and that lingered in my mind until now. And I was also an educator, well, not there, but like, I mean, in just like a nearby museum. And so we had like strong conversations with the educational departments. And I'm saying this story because the Biennale, they have like a very strong educational department that activates things that sometimes the curators cannot do. Or the things that the curators, because of the lack of time, because of specific pressures, because of other demands, are not able to engage with, you know. And so the educational team, that is like a permanent department, becomes bigger on the months that, a few months before the opening. They are the ones, I would say, that complexify our concepts and expands it in a certain sense that sometimes we as curators are not able to do. And we can discuss later why not, but they are. They can be more critical than sometimes we can be. They can challenge more the institutions in a way that sometimes we cannot. And they become some sort of like a face of the institution for most of the publics, you know, for different publics who visit the institution. And I'm, again, talking about them because they are also the ones who really create this space that is not only provisional, that I have a feeling that our work sometimes is too provisional. And of course, this ephemerity of our work is exciting, but they can really stay with the problem, quoting Donna and yeah. Because they are there, you know, like curators comes, curators goes, but they are always there. And they are the ones who are carrying on with what previous curators did it wrong. They're the ones who are there dealing with it. And when we were trying to also, I was thinking about the exhibition that Julia and Hoor mentioned just now, and I was wondering, something that comes often to my mind when we're dealing with with genocide, with wars, and artistic practice, you know, this crazy entanglement. How also can we, when we still need to show it to the world, to show it to different publics, how can we communicate what's going on? How can we communicate the mass of it, not rehearsing or restaging violence again? Because that's something that triggers me some sort of anxiety. Like, I mean, I struggle with that. And I don't know if you had to deal with that question before or during this show, but it's just something that, and it's not about not talking about it, but how can we talk about it, not bringing it to the stage again, you know, and producing the violence again.
Like the work in the Berlin Biennial, like restaging the Abu Ghraib photographs, you know, I think, yeah, we don't need, we're already oversaturated with violence, we're watching it live, and we don't want to sensationalize it. It's true, there's a way to talk about it, and it's important that a lot of these images that you see in the press that are shocking are not supposed to be shown or shouldn't be shown in an exhibition to confront people in that way, because it can be triggering And I think that comes to the idea of care and fragility as well. I think for me, going through the Berlin Biennial, as much as I love the curator, Qadir Atiyah, I really disagreed with having that work in such a public space and being confronted by it. I think we're all traumatized with what happened in Iraq, and those people, there was no consent for their photographs being used again as an artwork in a sensationalist way. So I think, yeah, your question is really, really important. I don't know what the answer is. Maybe someone else can.
I mean, I don't know if I have an answer, but maybe we just have to question ourselves about first listening to the artist. I think the answers should come from the artist and not from us as the curators or directors of biennials. This is the first point, and there is of course a balance between showing them and the artists, of course. And I know the problem that happened in Berlin, but at the same time, I think we have a role as a curator. Maybe it's too utopic to say that, but to make people dream and to remind to people that we can still dream and hope. And as much, I think, as we can dream together, then it can become a reality. And I really believe on that. And I think it's a way also to talk about the worst thing ever, if on the same time we could bring on the table some peaceful thoughts or some ideas or some hope on the future or some dreams that could be possible. So I think we have to find a balance between both sides.
But I just want to add that it is the institution's responsibility to really discuss with artists about these kind of works in public spaces. Having a small sign that nobody sees and doesn't know what to expect is not the solution. I think biennials are very public. You have a lot of, most of the time it's for families and children. You have a responsibility as an institution and also as a curator to really discuss with the artist and sometimes say, this is not the time and place for this kind of project. Yeah.
Of course.
I love this violence question because it's really actually at the core of what we do, and in the sense also that we work with images, we work with imaginaries, we work with this very matter of how also these images are transmitted and perform also differently actually in different contexts. I've long work actually when I started working like 15 or 17 years ago, I was really working on colonial archives in Spain. And so I remember when this question started to appear, how to actually circulate these images, what to do with them, how to do, And for me, it's very important actually not to, as you said, Thiago, not to reproduce the violence that they contain, but also for me it's very important not to erase them. I think also in the last 10 years I've seen a new generation of highly educated theoretical curators that have produced theoretical actually conditions of no, we cannot show, no, we cannot do, so everything is absolutely, it's actually producing a kind of like the opposite, no? So for me it's actually more, I would like to think about it as an acupunctural work, no? How to, again, taking again what you mentioned about the context. All work has to actually come from a close listening and hearing, no? So what does it make sense to do, to propose at a given moment and a given time? Because I think also what we're seeing, for example, in the last year, is that people maybe sometimes urge to very fast reactivity without looking or engaging with more slow time, transformative and reparative work, no? I feel like a lot of people actually have jumped more to publishing statement, which is important because representation and visibility are still mattering, especially in these moments of censorship. But what happens with all the infrastructural and ongoing work? And the work with violence goes on that other scale for me. To work, because it has to do with forms of non-violent pedagogy. It has to do with forms of non-violent communication and expression. It has to do with actually engaging with forms of digestion, probably, of those violences, but trying to, as you were saying, Mouna, more into world building or reparative projects, which are concrete and are structural as much as are programmatic, I think.
Yeah, I think the subject of hiding or not is something. It's impossible to find a single solution to it. I understand, and I felt very much the same at the Berlin Biennial, in the Berlin Biennial case. At the same time, in the case of Kassel, for example, I found it so barbaric to just take a word away from the show just because it was problematic. Would it be problematic? Absolutely. Did it have a place to stay and to be discussed? The same. So I'm not gonna go. I'm not gonna open it completely.
No, just in reference to people who don't know, the images are of the prisoners being tortured in Abu Ghraib. These are real photos. It's not a painting. It's not a depiction. These are photos of people who were tortured by American soldiers, and they're shown in massive scale. And it's triggering for a lot of us. You know, they look like us, and not only that, they had no say in having their photos published. These photos were published by the soldiers who tortured them and humiliated them. So there's a time and place. I agree with you about not erasing archives. That's really important, but we have to remember not to exoticize and sensationalize for the art world. And I think the work in Kassel is completely a different story. That was of an overreaction of what happened.
Yeah, and I think also that we should also be careful about the role of an artist. He's not a historian, he's not an archivist. Of course he could choose the present, but then usually there is always a metaphor, there is always something that goes beyond than just the acting of showing pictures. So I think if it's only talking about the present without any filters or without any poetic aspects, then it's not a work of art by itself. And I think then we should question ourselves where and when we should show this kind of work, and if a museum or an institution or biennial is made for this kind of work.
Sure.
I would say that the first attempt, when one decides to show this work, I would say is the desire or the intention to show some sort of solidarity, I would say. And I think that's why it's so tricky, you know, and that's why it's also important to understand who we are and, again, the differences. Like, I mean, the gaze, you know, like, I mean, that you might have like a specific gaze that doesn't bother or disturbs you. Yeah.
I mean, I think I'm trying to open up to the public a little bit because, and I've been trying to do that for a while, mostly because I do feel that we face these questions in very different ways, and I mean, I'm thinking of, I've recently refused the invitation of one of our members to talk in a panel because it was in a place in which I would have had issues with afterwards politically. Similarly, I remember times in which even going to do research in Istanbul was seen as something that was problematic, and I would receive very weird questions and looks just because I was doing research there. So I think this is also part of the same question. It's like, how do we deal with the pressure? And this goes kind of towards what Natasha was saying about being independent or interdependent. I think we definitely are interdependent in that sense. We cannot avoid these barriers, these pressures, these invisible lines. But how do we deal with that? Can we create strong enough networks between us to overcome this and to keep the dialogue alive that is important to be kept alive, not the ones that is artificially there, let's say. Going back to agonistic spaces.
I just want to go back to the idea of, again, certain ways of working, right? Like you were saying, we need to embrace our differences and cultural differences, because for the longest time we have always been told by Western institutions that we're not good enough, we have to do things their way. But now we have spaces all over the world, and biennials are flexible spaces as well. But this idea of doing things that are also appropriate culturally for your people, because if it's public funding, it's local money, you're responsible for your visitors that come in. And I want to talk a little bit like Didier's talk this morning about, why do objects have to go from a museum to another museum? They can just go back, and locally people can decide what they need to do with those objects. I think the whole idea of, we have collections from Egypt or from the Congo or other places because they can't look after them and we need to look after them. They don't have to look after them. They can bury them, they can burn them, they can do whatever they want. They can do what is culturally appropriate for them. And I think it's the same when we talk about biennials. We shouldn't adapt to what each other's doing. Like Sharjah is not Lyon, Lyon is not Sao Paulo, and it's great. That's why we love visiting each other and we love working together. So I think what you said, Thiago, is really important to think about, and a lot of times people don't think about our differences.
Just to jump into this, I think we really should cultivate our differences, and of course today homogeneity becomes something really common, and we have to be careful about it and to try to keep it as open as possible in terms of generation, because we should not forget the oldest artist or the youngest one, but also in terms of cultures, in terms of continents, in terms of technique. Artist who works with craft or with other aspects. So we really should keep as much as open the notion of art, and we should also look to the artists, because they're the one who could tell us how they work today and what are the medium that they are using, and they could open our minds and our way of thinking also. And I really think that it's by making differences that we are not any more isolated. As much as we try to remove or to delete the differences, then we become very lonely and isolated. So it's a real paradox, but I think it's with this paradox that we could move and work all together. No?
It was more like an example, of possibility, like trying to imagine how to create other words or other ways of working together. And one example that is in my mind now, you might have heard about the Brazilian painter Dalton Paula. Dalton Paula has been creating spectacular portraits, most of them of like black Brazilians, historical figures that we learn in schools or in textbooks, but we could never see their faces because there were no images. And part of his work has been creating those images or creating some sort of like imaginary. And well, Dalton has been quite successful, not only in terms of like institutional shows, but also in the market. Also MoMA has collected, several other museums has collected, and he's been doing quite well. And at a certain moment he felt lonely, and he really made it, but he felt lonely. And so basically he returned home and he just created this, let's say, art initiative that is called Sertão Negro. So it started with his studio, and he bought a piece of land, and later more piece of land. He invited people to come together. Those pieces of lands are cheap. People bought more piece of land or rented a small house around his house. And so he's starting a community, and they're trying to imagine how to make it sustainable as well. And at the same time, not cutting ties with like global art world, but creating some sort of like autonomy and protecting themselves of a very, well, of something, yeah, of a very extractivist system. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, that was like the word. And so, I mean, what they are doing there in that region, in the countryside of Brazil, might not be possible to do here in Lyon or in the south of France or in Sharjah, but it just reminds us that other models are possible, you know, other initiatives are possible than what we're currently living in and with.
Yeah, I feel this is one of the red threads, not just of this panel, but in general, is like keeping these spaces of imagination, keeping these spaces and these ideas of differences, of imagining different futures, different possibilities, different, I don't know, spaces of dialogue in this case, which is going around since this morning. I mean, we talked about it in the first panel, definitely was present in the second, and now as well. Yeah.
I know everybody's tired, it's a long day. But before we open up for questions, I also just want to say and clarify, we did speak about what is happening in Palestine and in Lebanon, but also we should not forget what is happening in the Sudan and the Congo and in Yemen and in Kashmir, Armenia, all of our friends who are going through different forms of oppression. I think we're talking about solidarities and talking about coming together. It's important to also give a platform for all these situations that are happening across the world, and they're all connected in the global picture. So I just wanted to say that.
Are there any questions? Does anybody want to add their own ideas or comment? We should also go to see Lyon Biennale, yes. Last round? No? Okay. Then, yeah, I want to thank you all in the panel now and everybody else that spoke today. And of course, again, the team of the Lyon Biennale for making this possible. It's been, I think we managed to talk about some very important things. The conversations are ongoing, and hopefully we'll manage to talk about them further in our public programs at in IBA. Thank you very much for being here today.